Thank you, Lara, so much, and thank you to the entire Garage team. I'm really delighted to be here and being able to share perspectives internationally where everyone is pushing for more and more accessibility and inclusion is really an incredible opportunity. So I'm delighted to be here in Moscow to meet with all of you. And there's a lot of expertise and a lot of knowledge in the room, and it's really exciting. And I am looking forward to continuing to learn from everyone today and tomorrow as well. And I guess in that line, I would love to learn a little bit more about everyone in the room. So how many people in the room, and if this applies to you, maybe raise your hand, how many people work in museum education? Okay, that's it looks like about half of the room. And how many people work in accessibility? Okay, and out of the people who work in accessibility, how many people work in accessibility and the arts or culture? Okay, so we have several people working in accessibility, and it seems about half of those people are working in accessibility and culture. And now, how many people know someone, it could be a family, or it could be a family member or a friend, or even someone professionally who has Alzheimer's disease or dementia? Okay, so about a third of the room. Okay, and how many people have worked with people with Alzheimer's disease or dementia? Okay. And you as well? Okay, so we've got a couple of people in here. Well, my name is Lara Schweller. Lara, thank you for the introduction. I apologize if I'm repeating anything because I did not have the translation and I did not hear what she said. But I am the coordinator of community and access programs at the Museum of Modern Art. That is in New York City in the United States of America. And I work on accessibility across the museum. That might be advising about accessible resources. It also sometimes includes staff training for a variety of departments. But my primary job is in education, and it's in working on a variety of programs for individuals and families. So I work on Meet Me at MoMA, which is our program for individuals with Alzheimer's disease or dementia and their family members or care partners. I work on Art Insight, which is our program for individuals who are blind or who have low vision. I work on Creatability, which is our program for individuals with developmental and learning disabilities, and that's a family program, or sometimes participants bring friends with them. And then I also work on Interpreting MoMA, which is our program for people who use American Sign Language. So it occurred to me earlier today, of course, that I think the only person presenting on the audience of individuals with Alzheimer's disease or dementia. And so there wasn't anyone else giving any background on the symptoms of this type of cognitive decline. So I thought I would just start with listing some of the symptoms from the Alzheimer's Association. So one of the symptoms of dementia, and dementia is a larger umbrella term. So Alzheimer's disease is one type of dementia. There are many other types, but Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia. So I will use the terms a bit interchangeably throughout the presentation, but they do mean slightly different things. So one of the symptoms is memory loss that disrupts daily life. Another symptom is challenges in planning or solving problems. Another symptom is difficulty completing familiar tasks, confusion with time and/or place, trouble understanding spatial relationships. That also might mean difficulty navigating physical spaces, moving through physical spaces. Difficulty verbalizing or sometimes speaking, a decrease in judgment and a decrease in monitoring one's social behaviors, behavioral changes, and changes in mood or personality. Not everyone who has Alzheimer's disease has all of these symptoms. This is just a very, very general overview. And if you know one person with Alzheimer's disease, that's just one person, and there's a lot of difference across the disease, and also a lot of difference as the disease progresses over time. Okay, so we will back up a bit from talking about Alzheimer's disease and dementia, and I'll just give you a little bit of an overview of the Museum of Modern Art and the accessibility work that we do there. I'll run through some of the logistics of how we do our programs, and then I will take questions at the end. So this is a photo of Alfred Barr. He founded the Museum of Modern Art in 1929 as an educational institution. And in 1944, he stated that the goal of the Museum of Modern Art was to help people enjoy, understand, and use the visual arts of our time. In his view, education was to be interpreted in the broadest and least academic sense. So it was supposed to be a useful education that could be applied to daily life. And he also saw the museum as a laboratory in whose experiments the public is invited to participate. And in our education department, we really like to think about how we can activate the museum for audiences and how we can make the museum a useful space and also a community space where a variety of audiences really feel comfortable and have a sense of ownership over the work that they do there, whether it's a conversation in the gallery or whether it's art making. And this is just a picture of Victor D'Amico. He started our education department. It's our 80th anniversary this year. So we had a birthday cake the other day. We're still celebrating him. So historically, accessibility at MoMA really emerged within the museum's education department. And this began in 1944, so about 15 years after the museum opened, with the War Veterans Art Center. So this program was for US veterans who were returning from World War II. It was somewhat art therapeutic, but it was really more vocational. So it was about teaching art classes that could translate into job skills for returning veterans. And I apologize that this is, no, it's not translated. So I'm going to just read the poster for you briefly. At the top, it says War Veterans Art Center. And underneath, right above the picture, it says recreational and pre-vocational classes in drawing, painting, sculpture, pottery, graphic arts, layout, which would be like today's graphic design, woodwork, jewelry, metalwork, model making, and weaving. Open free to the men who have served in the armed forces and merchant marine of the United States. And then it provides some contact information, and then at the bottom it says, also available to men now in service. And the museum also had programs where it sent art kits and art learning kits overseas to soldiers in action at that time. So this was the start. This progressed on to 1972 when the museum began doing touch tours for people who are blind or who have low vision. So while accessibility has its roots in the education department, it's important to remember that accessibility should really exist across an institution. It should be embedded within the institution's value system and its daily operations. And in order to push for that at the Museum of Modern Art, our Chief Operating Officer began what's called the Accessibility Task Force. So the Accessibility Task Force it's a meeting that meets semi-annually. It includes senior level staff from all of the different departments of the museum. And we get together every 6 months to talk about accessibility initiatives at the museum and also to plan ahead for the next 6-month exhibition cycle to think about what we can do to make those exhibitions more accessible. And what's great about this task force, I think, is that it identifies different stakeholders within the museum who care about accessibility and who become excited to think about how to make the work in their department, whether it's curatorial or graphic design or exhibition design, how to make all of that work accessible. And then the task force also has its own operating budget for accessibility so that it can pay for larger accessibility projects and initiatives that will benefit the entire museum. And I think that having this task force for the last maybe 4 or 5 years has really created a shift in the institution and has helped people to engage with accessibility and to become really excited about accessibility. And this is an image of Francesca Rosenberg, she has blonde hair, and Cleo King, who has light brown hair and her arm is unfortunately blocking her face. Francesca is the director of school, teacher, community, and access programs within our department. Cleo King works for the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities in New York City, but her background is in accessibility law. And then the woman behind her is Lana Hum, who is the director of our exhibition design department. And Cleo was giving the 4 of us a walkthrough of the museum and identifying what was accessible, and trust me, also what was not accessible at that time, and explaining all of this in design and physical terms for Lana so that she could go back to the exhibitions department and really begin to translate accessibility within the exhibition design language, which is very different from my or Francesca's education language. And so this is just an example of how we work across departments and begin to engage with a lot of other stakeholders. Now, through our education department, in access programs, we serve last year over 11,000 people with disabilities. We do this through free gallery and studio programming for groups that serve individuals with disabilities. This could be a day program for adults with developmental disabilities. It could be a school specifically for children who are blind or low vision. It's any group of individuals with disabilities. We also have partnerships, 50 partnerships with a variety of organizations across the 5 boroughs of New York City that work with individuals with disabilities. And then we have free monthly programs for individuals with disabilities and their families. And I will focus on the monthly programs today. The first one says Art in Sight, and that is a program for individuals who are blind or low vision. Meet Me at MoMA, the focus of this talk, individuals with Alzheimer's disease or dementia. Interpreting MoMA, which is our program for ASL, American Sign Language users. I'll try not to use acronyms in this talk. And Creatability, which is our program for individuals with developmental and learning disabilities. So rather than hearing from me, it's, I think, much better to hear from participants in the program. So I'll show a quick video, please, of these programs.
Since I discovered the accessibility of the museums, I've been able to appreciate art, which I never could before. Today we felt a Matisse sculpture. I mean, who in the world would think that anybody could ever feel a Matisse sculpture? For just me to be able to feel Matisse, it's thrilling.
For our kids, they have a hard time expressing themselves.
Go ahead, Ethel.
Lots of shapes.
Lots of shapes, absolutely.
So in the museum, they're learning to do that. They see the artists who've done it. Some artists actually had a hard time also expressing themselves, choose art to do that.
If I were to take my brother to the museum by myself and look at artwork, I don't think he gets the same experience as being in a group with peers that may have similar needs that he does.
I come here because I have a chance to talk with my friends and get their opinions and perspectives of art and see what they're thinking. I enjoy it a lot.
Any question that comes to mind, we can ask and have an interchange with the docent, and that really inspires me. I really, really enjoy that, and I think that is so important for the deaf community. I'm telling you, my mind has grown because of this. It's really been great.
We are museum goers. We've been married 50 years, and those 50 years we've traveled throughout the world. We've been to a zillion museums, but I have never had any experience like what I have here. And the same thing for my husband. He looks forward to this very, 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 very much. Don't you, Darren? You would have missed it.
She's right.
But it's not just us. It's sharing with our friends and sharing with our family in terms of what we do, whether it's in an art workshop or what we've learned. It's so important. It's tremendously important in terms of learning and growing, even at our age, is.
While we live, I want to be able to live and grow.
Okay. Thank you for everyone in the back who's facilitating the video playing and also for the communication and translation. So I will talk about Meet Me at MoMA. I'm also going to talk about the larger outreach initiative, which is or was called the Alzheimer's Project. And I think after that, you'll see me rush through a couple of slides that I won't be discussing for timing purposes, and we'll go to questions. So programming for individuals with Alzheimer's disease grew out of programming for older adults that we were already doing in senior centers and nursing homes. We were doing off-site lectures, so sending freelance art historians at that time either to nursing homes or to senior centers. And what we realized in doing that programming is that we were working with a lot of individuals with Alzheimer's disease, and that we needed to learn more about the particular needs of that population so that we could adjust our teaching strategies and make sure that we were providing an effective and engaging learning experience. So we piloted a program. The pilot period consisted of sessions with one assisted living facility and support groups for people with early stage Alzheimer's disease, as well as training from Mount Sinai School of Medicine, which is a large school of medicine in New York City, and then internal trainings for staff. And I'll talk about this, I think, in a few minutes, but often dementia and Alzheimer's disease is separated into early stages, middle stages, and late stages. And our program, Meet Me at MoMA, is specifically geared towards individuals in the early and middle stages of dementia or Alzheimer's disease, but we have a small cohort or group of families who have been coming for so many years at this point that they have progressed into later stages of dementia, and we still welcome them to the program, but pair them with a particular educator and make sure to do specialized activities for that group. So after the initial pilot period, Meet Me at MoMA, and I'm just realizing, Hannah, this is you. Yeah. But someone had the notes wrong in the slide. They had that listed as another person, but this is Hannah, who will be presenting next, and she used to teach at the museum, and as you can see, taught in the pilot period of the Meet Me at MoMA program. After the pilot period, the program launched in January of 2006. It started small. Initially, we just advertised the program through MoMA's membership base. So many members perhaps had parents who had dementia or Alzheimer's disease, or partners or friends, and that's how people began coming to the program. And this was great because we often think about when we start new programs, how do we do outreach to our communities to make sure that people are getting the knowledge that the program exists, and this was our model, just reaching out to our current membership base, and that was free advertising for us. Because of press, the program grew relatively quickly. Very soon after the launch, we scaled up to having 4 groups. Typically, there were about 12 to 15 people per group, so it grew from about 25 people up to about 60 people, and then we maxed out at having 6 groups of people. Typically, we'd have between 70 to 80 people coming to the program. Participants who have Alzheimer's disease or dementia, they usually come with one care partner. That might be a family member, it might be a home health aide. So if you think that the number is 70 to 80 people total, about half that number were individuals with Alzheimer's disease or dementia. Let's see, so initially the program occurred on days that the museum was closed to the public. That's why this gallery looks so peaceful and so quiet. But now MoMA is open 7 days a week, so we just have to be creative about how we find spaces and times to bring individuals in when the gallery is a bit more quiet. So the MoMA Alzheimer's Project. Press in September of 2006 led to a very generous grant from the MetLife Foundation to develop resources and to begin to do outreach work with other museums and institutions. The funding lasted for 7 years, and it allowed us to create a variety of resources. I think I'm missing some slides in here. I'll just go forward and see if they're, oh, there they are, okay. So I might need to ask your help because I can't actually read the slides that I just passed through. So I'll go backwards a little bit and I'll try and find the right one. The MoMA Alzheimer's Project allowed us to present at 380 museums and connect with 13,000 people through conferences. And I'll have to add on this museum and this conference. We created a book and a website. Both of those came out in 2009. The website has been updated over the years to include videos of programs in the galleries and also other videos that feature colleagues from around the world talking about how they developed their own programs. And these training resources and videos are in circulation and use today. So let me quickly go back to these slides. Can I have so this is about numbers in Alzheimer's disease, so I'll come back to that because I see 2020 and 2050. This is also about numbers in Alzheimer's disease. Can I have this presentation? Is that correct? Does this say presentation? Yeah. Wonderful, okay. So this again is just about the resource of the MetLife Foundation really allowed us to do a lot. We can't do this anymore. It ended a few years ago. But we did presentations around the world, as I mentioned, and these weren't just at museums or museum-related conferences, but we also did presentations within the health sector. And it's really important when you're working with something like Alzheimer's disease to engage with the larger health community. So there are plenty of recreational programs or what you might call therapeutic programs happening at museums, but there's also a ton of research that's going on within the health sector. And I think presenting with the health sector allowed us to partner and do research, which became really important for gaining funding for the programs. Okay, so now, all right, so the future of older adults. What does the future hold? If we're all lucky, we're aging, right? Okay, I thought that was a good, no one laughed at that, but that was my one bit of humor. So by 2020, the number of adults aged 65 and over will outnumber children under the age of 5 for the first time in history. So for the first time in history, older adults will outnumber young children. And this is just in 2020. By 2050, older adults will outnumber all children under the age of 14. So as time goes on, our population is skewing older and older. Okay, and let's see, there we go. So over 130,000 individuals are living with Alzheimer's disease just in New York City. It's a very high number. Over 5.2 million individuals are living with Alzheimer's disease in the United States. And then I believe this is a slide about numbers in Russia, that over 5.2 million individuals, 1.5 million, that was the US number, so 1.5 million people are living with dementia in Russia, and that worldwide, at least 44 million people are living with dementia, making the disease a global health crisis that must be addressed. So when we think about dementia and Alzheimer's disease, it's understood as cognitive decline, or sometimes in some cultures as a mental health condition. And different cultures have different stigmas surrounding this. Oftentimes, doctors have found that cases of Alzheimer's disease and dementia is really underreported, especially in particular cultures, countries, ethnicities. So this number is likely much higher than what's presented here. The other thing to think about, and we can think about this really with all accessible programs, is that someone who has Alzheimer's disease or dementia has a family, if they're lucky, they have friends, they have other people in their lives. All of those other people, let's say it's at least 4 or 5 other people, are going to be really excited when you make your museum inclusive and accepting of people with Alzheimer's disease. So you're not just affecting the person with Alzheimer's disease or dementia, you're creating a ripple effect that extends to families and friends, and as I'll talk about, really extends through generations as well. Okay. Just bear with me, I'm gonna try and find, okay, this is it. So we have the opportunity to rethink the notion of family as it relates to the museum. We really need to think about our future museum visitors. And, I think when we think about family programs, we often imagine parents and young children. I know at MoMA, family programs apply to this type of family that skews younger. But as older adults, as a population grow and grow, we really have the opportunity to rethink family programs as something that's more intergenerational. So maybe it's a grandparent and a parent and a child. And I think in general, in this modern era, we can rethink that definition of family much more broadly. But this is just one example of how that can happen and how programs like this can really work towards that shift within a cultural institution. So here is one example of a family. Here is another example of a family. This is a Meet Me at MoMA family. And it's a family of older generations. So what can museums do specifically? Okay, this has not been translated. I'm going to take a little bit of time just to explain this image. So this is called the bookshelf analogy, and it's a graphic or an image that's used to show changes in the brain of a person with Alzheimer's disease, depending on what age bracket they fall into and also what stage of dementia they are experiencing. So the first picture, or the picture on the left, at the bottom it says early stage dementia, and the picture on the right, at the bottom it says middle stage dementia. Now, from the top to the bottom, each shelf is labeled, and it represents a different age bracket of an individual. So the top shelf is old age. The shelf below that is middle age. The shelf below that is adulthood. The shelf below that is teenage years. And the shelf below that is childhood. And I'm sorry, this is going to get more complicated. In each image, there are 2 bookshelves. That first bookshelf on the left, above it says hippocampus. This is the region of the brain that manages the processing of logic, fact, and reason. And those are the 3 words written in black below hippocampus. The shelf on the right says amygdala, and this is the area of the brain that processes feelings and emotions and emotional memories. On the next image, it's repeated. It's hippocampus and amygdala. Okay, does anyone have questions about this image? It's clear, okay. So the reason why I like to use this image is because it makes it a little bit more clear. It did for me as I was first learning about Alzheimer's disease, how the brain specifically might be experiencing decline, and also how it's not experiencing any decline in between early stage dementia and middle stage dementia. So in the bookshelf all the way on the left, that's the hippocampus which is processing logic, fact, and reason, and that's what it looks like in early stage dementia. So that top shelf, those are older adults, it's starting to clear out a little bit. That ability to process logic, fact, and reason, that has been affected somewhat. But the ability to process feelings and emotions and emotional memories isn't affected at all. It's perfectly functioning. As you move into middle stage dementia, the hippocampus shelf becomes a bit more bare. So for older adults, the ability to process logic, fact, and reason in general is pretty severely affected. The bookshelf is empty. For middle-aged adults and adults, I mean, this word adulthood is vague, but for this would be maybe adults in their 40s or 50s. These would be people who are experiencing early onset Alzheimer's. The ability to process logic, fact, and reason is compromised. But if you look at the amygdala in middle stage dementia, that part of the brain that's still processing feelings and emotional memories, there's no change whatsoever. So between early stage dementia and middle stage dementia, there's no change in the way that people can process how they feel. So they understand how they feel. They understand how an environment makes them feel. They understand how a person makes them feel. And they have access to all of these very, very rich, complex memories, specifically emotional memories. And what's great about the museum is that when you're coming to the museum, you can begin to engage with the amygdala areas of the brain. So, what can museums do specifically? Visual art can be a nonverbal language. And can someone who speaks Russian and English tell me what this first line says? What? Sorry, one. Okay, good. So it is the right slide. Okay, thank you. Okay, so visual art can be a nonverbal language. It is a symbolism and imagery that's often used to express complex emotions and feelings without verbalizing or processing language. When you come to the museum, you're not discussing your diagnosis of Alzheimer's or your health, which unfortunately between people with Alzheimer's disease and their care partners, much of the conversation of a day does revolve around health and caretaking. But when you come to the museum, that's not what you're doing. You're talking about art, and you are among participants who are all excited to be at the museum. And often for the participants who come to the museum, art is a shared interest. That's why they've motivated to get to the Museum of Modern Art in the first place. And then museums are social and enriching environments. We can see from the garage, they're often beautiful spaces to be in and beautiful spaces to spend time in. And then a program like Meet Me at MoMA is really relationship-based work. We practice inquiry-based education, which I will discuss a bit later on. And this is a type of education that privileges personal experience and the sharing of memory as an approach to art. And it also privileges personal experience as a valid contribution to a conversation. Okay. Okay, so relationship-based work. So when we talk about all of our access programs, including Meet Me at MoMA, we talk about it being relationship-based work. So this is an image of one of our educators, Carrie Downey, and that is Ty. He still comes to the program. He's wonderful. We want our educators to connect with our individuals. I'm pointing at Hannah because I know she's done this and understands. And what we do at the museum is we work with artists. So all of our educators who teach our access programs are practicing artists, and they're also trained as teachers. And what we found over the years is that artists tend to be curious by nature, and they are often thinking outside of the box, naturally. Artists tend to see difference as a positive rather than something to overcome or an obstacle. And artists are often flexible and nimble when interacting with different types of learners. So the program is designed in a similar format to a traditional gallery tour for adults. All of our educators are specially trained to work with people with Alzheimer's disease or dementia, so that even though we don't mention Alzheimer's disease on the day of the program, they are equipped to support participants in a conversation and in a gallery experience. Everyone comes in at the program. I'm going to start to get into logistics now. We check everyone in at the desk. It's always the same people at check-in, so people can begin to form relationships with the people who are administering and facilitating the program. I'm one of those people. I talk on the phone to our participants. I see them at the desk. We often email with participants as well. As people come in, we break them off into groups of about 10 to 15 people. Each of those groups are paired with a specially trained educator and also with a volunteer who assists them in navigating through the galleries. We use stools so that everyone is comfortable in the galleries, and I noticed they're the same stools as the Garage Museum. They're very comfortable. And we also use assistive listening devices like many people are wearing now. And that normalizes best practices in accessibility. We just pass them out to everyone. And instead of using them for translation, they just amplify the sound of the educator's voice, and the educator speaks into a microphone. We have on average, depending on the day, between 4,000 and 14,000 people who are coming through the museum. And it gets very loud, and it's hard to hear the educator, and it's hard to focus. So having the assistive listening device is really key. So our program does have therapeutic benefits. Specifically, and I'll talk about this later, we've done studies to show that it improves quality of life, but the goals come out of museum education. So the goal is really to provide a meaningful, stimulating experience and to honor lifetime learning across the spectrum of age. And really, in this sense, as I mentioned before, they're not that different than typical gallery programs for any other audience. Okay. All right, so art-looking programs. They are 1.5 hours long. They include inquiry-based discussion. We tend to stop at 4 to 5 artworks throughout the museum. We try to stick to one floor to make it more easy to navigate. And they're always organized by a theme. So how's everyone doing in the audience? Any questions so far? Quick questions? Okay, yeah. Maybe wait for the microphone.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Could you give any examples of specific subjects that were covered by a single program? What could be a topic for a tour?
You know, you really just asked the perfect question, because I'll say this again, you just asked the perfect question. I couldn't have thought of a better question for you to ask. Thank you. Because we're actually going to begin doing a discussion and to demonstrate inquiry-based education. And the theme, which is a theme that we use, is movement and motion in art. And then I can also give you some more examples of other themes after we do this. Is that what you meant? Like, what themes would we typically use? Sort of? Yep. Okay, well, we'll come back to you in a bit. Hold on. Okay, so inquiry-based activity. So if everyone, since we are condensed for time, normally in the galleries I would say take a minute to look at this, and then I would turn and I would look at it for a minute too, just to model that looking. But let's all take a solid 15 seconds, and I want everyone to really look at this artwork. And I'd like for you to pay attention to the different colors that the artist has used. And I'd like for you to pay attention to where you see specific colors in different areas of the artwork. And I'd also like for you to pay attention to the scenery in this painting. Okay, who would like to describe what they see?
There is a night, and we can see a big tree in front of the paintings, and we can see a night city, or maybe it's village. And of course, there are a lot of different colors.
Okay, so you are noticing that it's night, that you see a tree, and that you see a village, and it looks like the village is in nighttime. How do you know that it's nighttime? What do you see that makes you say that?
Because there is a dark colors, and it's moon, and it's Van Gogh, and we know that there is a picture is night.
Okay, so you know that it's night because you see dark colors and you see a moon. And can you point to where you see the moon?
It's in the right.
In the upper right hand?
Upright corner, yeah.
Okay, and you know that it's nighttime because you recognize the painting as a Van Gogh painting.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Does anyone else want to share what they see or what they notice about the color or about the scenery and the artwork?
I think that the most powerful feeling here is this blue vortex something, which is pierced by a black, sharp shape. And in the upper right corner there is a powerful yellow, which is scattered around the painting as well. And the scenery, 15 seconds is not enough.
Okay, so I'll repeat the last thing first. 15 seconds is not enough, I agree. You noticed a powerful blue vortex. I really love that word. We see this sort of like turbulent, roiling, moving, bubbling sky. And you said it's pierced, which is another really descriptive, evocative word. It's pierced by this large black thing. And I think that that's the tree that you were describing, right? Okay, so a tree to you and something piercing the sky to you. And you look like you want to add something? Mm-hmm.
Yes, we can see light at windows.
Yes. And what you said that you can see lighted windows. What does that make you think of?
Because only at night we can see light inside some houses. It can be day or morning, I think.
Mm-hmm. So it could maybe be early in the day, in the morning, or at night?
It can be only at night.
Only at night, okay. Does it feel, what's the mood of that village for you, those lighted windows?
I think that it's sad mood.
Sad?
Yes.
Okay. Just a show of hands, how many people feel like the mood is sad? Okay, maybe a couple people. And Anastasia, what about you?
In
this painting, I don't see different colors here. I see 4 colors: green, blue, yellow, and black. And this doesn't make me feel sad, especially the bright yellow.
How does it make it? So you see 4 colors: blue, green, yellow, and black, and it doesn't make you sad.
It doesn't mean that I'm visually impaired. Just I see 4 these basic colors.
Okay, and if it doesn't make you feel sad, how does it make you feel?
I know that there must be some awe or fear or anxiety from all those vortexes and peaks and sharp shapes, but the yellow is not scary and the blue is not scary at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's rather bright and light.
Yeah, it's quite complex. So Anastasia is saying that she knows from these vortexes, so using that word, that there's an element of fear or anxiety in this painting, but then she notices the yellow stars and the moon, and those are, I don't know, bright and maybe don't evoke this sense of fear or anxiety. So this is by the artist Vincent van Gogh. It's called The Starry Night. It's from 1889. It's June, so it's painted in the summertime. And he painted this in the village of Saint-Rémy, and I guess I don't need to hold this anymore. He spent a year in a mental institution in that village, and during that time, he created over 150 paintings of the hospital ground and of the landscape surrounding the village. Does that change how anyone interprets the artwork? I see some people shaking their heads. I see another person shaking their head. I see some people looking thoughtfully. Does anyone have anything else that they'd like to share? I see some people laughing in the back row. Anything else? Anything this reminds you of?
Эта картина вызывает тревогу.
This painting provokes anxiety.
Эта картина вызывает тревогу. Да, у него. Переведите просто на английский.
Эта картина вызывает
This painting provokes anxiety.
Anxiety.
Feeling restless. Feeling restless.
Reckless.
Restless.
А еще?
Reckless or recluse?
Restless. Restless.
Restless, okay. Great, thank you for your contribution. Thank you for everyone for participating. I know it's not always customary mid-presentation, but I appreciate that we could have a little bit of conversation. Okay, I will skip the next work, but I would have gone on to talk about this Jackson Pollock painting. I'm sorry, I see some people are a little disappointed. If you catch me afterward, I'm happy to happy to talk about Jackson Pollock all day, any day. But I wanted to do a little bit of a demonstration just to give you a sense of how we do Meet Me at MoMA. It's exactly like that. These are the components of an art discussion. So we have a theme and works of art to discuss. The theme I chose for this was movement and motion in art. We ask open-ended questions that will invite conversation. So I began with giving you some direction about what to pay attention to, and then invited everyone to share what they had noticed and to share their descriptions. We have art historical information to share, but we don't always we don't share most of the art historical information that we have, and I'll get to that in a bit. And we try to have a structured conversation. So the structure of the conversation is observation, description, interpretation, and connection. And we'd like to create a comfortable environment that allows for exchange and storytelling. So when we are selecting artworks, in the museum, we avoid works of art that are very small. This is because we often have a group of about 12 to 14 people total. So imagine trying to fit 12 to 14 adult bodies around a small artwork. You'd have to sit kind of far away. It means that most people might not be able to see the artwork very well. It also means that, you could invite people to get up and look at the artwork, but if there's someone in the group who has more difficulty standing up and sitting down on the stool, then you begin to exclude them. So we try to choose larger artworks. Avoid artworks that are hung salon style. So salon style is when a bunch of artworks are hung next to each other on a wall. Maybe it's a grouping of 5 to 10 artworks. The reason we do this is because when you're discussing one artwork, it's much easier to focus in on one piece. If you were looking at a wall that was hung salon style and trying to have a conversation about just one piece out of that grouping, the conversation would inevitably move to all of the other artworks. If that's your goal, then that's great. But we're often trying to discuss one artwork at a time. You want to avoid works of art that are displayed near doors and elevators. The noise pollution of the door and the elevator or the escalator is very distracting, especially for this audience. Also consider that these are places with a lot of foot traffic and where people in museums are often having side conversations before they're quietly viewing art, so they tend to be extra noisy and extra distracting. And you want to avoid choosing works that are far away from each other. This is because you don't want to have to travel too long in between artworks. It takes away from the time that you can spend having a meaningful conversation. So when we're sequencing artworks, it's best to move from simpler or more figurative works to those that are more complex or abstract. I would have moved from the Van Gogh to the Pollock. With figurative works, people tend to have more to grab onto because you can recognize something in the artwork. Some people feel a bit intimidated jumping into a conversation about modern art or abstract art or contemporary art without having already begun to share as a group. And so that's just a general strategy that we use, especially because we have a lot of very abstract and challenging artwork at our museum. And again, you want to take into account object placement and not choose works of art that are very far away. So we talk about a term called scaffolded conversations, and this is just how we structure the conversation. So again, observation, quietly looking closely at the entire artwork. It would be more than 15 seconds again. But I will say that the average person only looks at an artwork for approximately 3 seconds before moving on. So we talk about slow looking in our art museum, really getting people to slow down through education programs. Description, taking an objective visual inventory. So thinking about line and shape, that vortex was such a great idea, color, composition, material, technique, subject matter, interpretation, assigning meaning and making inferences, so making decisions about meaning based on what you see. This might be time and place, narrative, mood or psychological effect, and an artist's intention, an artist's biographical information, historical and social context, and then finally connection, encouraging personal responses. So personal life experience and opinions, psychological and emotional effect, and cultural changes and world events. And I tried to sort of push the conversation there at the end, inviting people to share any last thoughts or to share if this reminded them of anything. We didn't quite go there. It doesn't always happen in every conversation, but we do always provide that as an inroad for the conversation for people who feel comfortable sharing more personal experiences. So how do we use and layer in information? We use it only to validate participant responses. So let's say someone had said, this looks like a French village. I would have said, why, yes, this is the village of Saint-Remy. This is where Van Gogh was living for a year. We also use it to start new threads of conversation. So I introduced information about the location because the conversation was at a point where it felt like it was at a still. And so I used the information to maybe provide new insight into the artwork. But we never start by giving people information about the artwork or weighing down the conversation with art historical information. Okay, so what is different about working with people with Alzheimer's disease? Repetition is necessary. So repeating what you're saying and repeating concepts and major ideas in the conversation. Personal connections and narratives are encouraged. So we really invite people to share their personal stories and their personal memories. Eye contact. We ask our educators not only to make eye contact with all individuals as they're speaking to them, but we also ask our educators to watch the eye motions and the body movements of individuals. During the presentation on augmentative and alternative communication, when there was that slide up about how you could create that transparent board and watch someone's eye movement as they move to different spaces, we do that a lot with our gallery tours, but we're watching where people's eyes are looking on the painting. So let's say you have someone who's not verbally participating, but you've asked a question and you see they're responding by looking in specific places. You can validate their contribution by saying, oh, I see that you're looking in this specific place. Maybe you're noticing this or maybe you're noticing that. And then you can turn that thought to the rest of the group and invite them to participate. And then we really ask our educators to connect one-on-one with the group. So oftentimes our educator will walk around the entire group and sit down with each individual and invite them to share a comment or a thought, and then share that back with the rest of the group. And this is really helpful for some of our participants who are quieter or a bit more shy. Okay, how am I doing on time? Anyone? Okay. Well, I'll keep going until someone says something to me. Right. So how do you get more people involved in the conversation? Become a performer. We all do that, I think, in museum education or teaching. We all feel like we're performing in front of a crowd. Think of yourself as a facilitator, someone who's guiding a conversation, not someone who's teaching or giving a tour of a museum. Share information about yourself when it is applicable to the conversation. Sometimes when you give a little of yourself, you invite other people to give a little bit of themselves too, and it gets the conversation going and it makes people feel more welcome. Maintain a certain degree of lightness and humor. Remember that when people come to the museum, they're coming to have fun. It doesn't need to be serious. People need to enjoy themselves when possible. Be supportive and show genuine interest in the comments and interpretations of each participant. Be relaxed about where the conversation goes. Someone might make an off-the-wall comment. Go with it. You know, you never know where that's going to take a conversation. It could go into a really interesting, productive space. I've had that happen. I've had some very out of context comments, and we just keep talking, and you know what? It makes everyone feel comfortable, and I think it loosens you up as an educator too when you're not so focused on where the conversation is going and getting to that goal. In that same reasoning, never correct your participants. Again, encourage personal connections and narratives, allow for tangential comments, and always talk directly to the person with Alzheimer's disease, not to their care partner. You can talk to the care partner when you're speaking to the care partner, but when you want to address the person with Alzheimer's disease, speak to them and make contact. So what are the actual benefits? Okay, and this goes back to this slide that was back here. There was an article. There we go. Okay, so this was an article that was published about the program. This says, the Pablo Picasso Alzheimer's therapy, an experiment at museums yields results that can't fully be explained. And in this, it quotes a participant saying, it's like he's trying to tell a story using words that don't exist. And he said this about a Picasso painting. I'll repeat it. It's like he's trying to tell a story using words that don't exist. That's a very complex thought. And it's a very complex interpretation of Picasso as well. I think you wouldn't even know who said this, whether it was someone with Alzheimer's disease or their care partner, right? Okay, well, I wouldn't have known who had said it. And you know, I think it's really important because it shows that people with Alzheimer's disease really have the ability to make complex thoughts, to make meaningful connections with the artwork. But when you're labeled as having a disease, especially one that manifests in cognitive decline, people take that away from you a lot of the time, unfortunately. They assume that you're not going to have a meaningful conversation or have this complex thought, but the ability is very much there, and what we found is that engaging in art museums and discussing artwork can really bring that out. And so we did a study with the NYU School of Medicine in 2008, looking at quality of life outcomes for individuals with early stage Alzheimer's disease and their caregivers, and we also looked at the impact the program had on their relationship. So people used this happiness scale to describe their emotions. And what this graph shows, the top level shows the improvement of mood in the person who had Alzheimer's. It showed the improvement of mood in the caregiver, and the bottom graph shows the improvement of mood in the person of Alzheimer's disease, and they marked their moods before and after the program. And we also did quality of life studies in a variety of different capacities. We did a focus group. We gave take-home surveys. This is just one example of a study. And again, I have to say that doing this study really helps when you're starting a new program to think about increasing funding. And I see Lara coming down. Do I have one more minute just to finish? Okay, thank you. All right. So Some more results. There were fewer emotional problems in people with Alzheimer's disease, an elevated mood, an increase in social support, and elevated self-esteem. And what we learned is that the social component was very important, intellectual stimulation, the educator was extremely important, a welcoming environment, a shared experience, and an opportunity to participate as equals. So an opportunity for the participant with Alzheimer's disease to feel equal to their caregiver. And there was also emotional carryover to other aspects of people's lives. So I'll just run through these images. There are a few key words that you'll see: connection, fun, collaboration, discovery, and communication. These are just some images from our program. I went to MoMA and had a ball. These are people making art together. That's Susie and Marty. This is Marty making art with one of our educators. They were definitely having a blast. Let's see, these are participants exploring artwork together and making artwork together. And these are participants and their caregivers discovering something new together. And that process of discovering something together is, I think, a very rich one. This is some artwork. And then just communication. So these are works of art made by people with Alzheimer's disease. This one says, "I think everything is upside down." This one says, "Who am I?" And at the bottom, this one says, "I'm happy." And again, these are very complex emotional renderings of one's experience. So this is just the last slide, and it just shares some key words that describe the experience. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to contact me. These are the slides I told you I would skip through. But here's my contact information. And again, thank you for having me.
We can have a question session now.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought we were
Если
we
у
were
кого-то
totally
есть
out of time.
вопросы,
Okay.
пожалуйста, поднимайте руки.
If you have questions, please raise your hand.
Большое спасибо за рассказ, потому что момент,
I think
когда
that
вы
this
говорите об акценте на
emphasis
эмоциональной части,
on
на
the
личном
emotional
опыте,
component
это
and on
то,
the personal
что, с
experience
одной стороны,
is
включает
something
вообще
that
любого
both
человека в
includes any
происходящее,
person,
и при
any
этом это то,
individual
что
into
доступно в данном
what's
случае
happening
людям
and is
с
accessible to
деменцией,
individuals with
и так
dementia.
как мы здесь говорим о
And
людях
as
с
we are
проблемами
talking
интеллектуального
about
развития,
people
то
with
для них
cognitive
тоже. И
issues
это как раз получается
and
такая
learning
территория,
difficulties,
где
then it
они
would work
могут
for them as well.
встретиться.
And this
И
is
я,
a
собственно, хотела
place for them
спросить,
all
есть ли
to
у вас
meet.
опыт, когда
Have you
вы
got any experience
приглашаете
of
людей без деменции на
inviting
эти экскурсии,
people
где на них не
without
выливается там
dementia
поток информации и так далее, а
to
где
such
вызывается к
events
их
where
личному опыту,
this is discussed from the point of view of their own personal experience? And what is the reaction of people without dementia?
Thank you. So the question or the comment was that focusing on the emotional and personal experience was very positive. And the question, I think, was, one, if we do this with individuals with learning or developmental disabilities, but also if we do this with all individuals. Is that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do. So focusing on the emotional and the personal experience of our participants, that's very much a part of what we call inquiry-based education. I think if there's an overriding philosophy that I ascribe to as a museum educator, it's that the way that we can invite people in to enjoy the museum is to invite them in by experiencing artwork through their personal lens. Every single person who comes to the museum comes with so much personal knowledge and life experience. So I really try to connect with that and learn from my participants because they always open my eyes in seeing the artwork in a new way.
So, am I right in understanding that MoMA has this philosophy that you want to have this emphasis on emotion and personal experience for all visitors?
I would say yes, although we do have a lot of different styles of education programs. We have more traditional programs that are lecture style, that offer more art historical information, but across all of our access and community groups, I'd say also across family programs, and then also across school programs, the approach is very much about guiding people to understand art through their personal experience. Does anyone else have a... Oh.
Насколько я помню, вот в этом тулките, в
As
этих
far
двух
as I
книжечках,
remember, in the
которые вы быстро
toolkit that
показывали,
you
там
showed
есть
here
еще и
quickly,
набор
there
карточек
is
с теми
a
же
set of
произведениями,
cards
которые смотрели
with
на
the
экскурсии, чтобы
artworks that were seen at the
помощник,
tour,
ассистент мог
so that
дома
an
с человеком с
assistant
деменцией
can
повторить,
show this
поговорить
individual
о
with
том, как
dementia
они
these
ходили
cards
в
at
музей, чтобы
home,
он вспоминал,
revive
тренировал
this
память. Может, вы
at home
немножко расскажите?
to help them training their memory. Could you highlight this?
Yes, thank you. Have you seen it? Have you been to a training before? Okay. What the question that this audience member just raised was, do we have these artworks that we can that match up with what we've looked at on the tour that we can give to participants and caregivers so that they can go home and continue to look at these artworks? We do have high quality reproductions of many of our artworks. When those match up with what we've looked at on the tour, we are able to give those artworks to families so that they can continue to discuss these artworks at home. And that's for across all of our programs. It's particularly helpful here, but it's also very helpful for a number of different audiences. And they're called MoMA in a box cards. It doesn't make sense, the name, but they're just art reproductions. And I think that if you can offer that structure of looking at an artwork and then giving someone a reproduction so that they can continue the conversation at home, it does tend to deepen the understanding over time. Any other questions? Yeah.
Я знаю, что в MoMA
I know
также
that
очень большая
at
развлекательная
MoMA there is a
программа.
big entertainment
И,
program.
то есть это концерты,
There
всевозможные
are
лекции.
concerts,
Есть
there
ли
are
какое-то
lectures.
вовлечение вот людей с
Do you
особенностями в данный
include
контекст?
people with disabilities into this context?
So the comment was that there's a robust entertainment program at MoMA with concerts or lectures, and do we include people with disabilities in those programs? Absolutely. We share this information with all of our audiences. Just the other day, there's an individual, Sharon. She is blind and comes to our Art Insight program. I was giving her a private tour the other day of the museum, and she was excited to tell me that she was coming back the following week for the Robert Rauschenberg dance performance in the garden. And I was like, Sharon, you're seeing more stuff around the museum than I am. So people definitely are invited to participate, not just in the program that, subscribes to their disability per se, but to all of the programs at the museum. And if someone wants to come to another program, we do what we can to help facilitate that experience and make it enjoyable for them. Sorry, I thought the thank you was my signal to exit stage.
I have a question.
Okay.
У меня есть вопрос.
Russian. Я хотела сказать спасибо, что
I want to
поделились
thank
таким
you
прекрасным
for
опытом.
sharing this experience with us.
Вопрос, просто
And
мне кажется, что в нашей
I
стране
believe that in
эта
our
программа, к
country,
сожалению, сейчас
this
невозможна. И я
program would
очень
be
сожалею,
impossible,
потому что
unfortunately.
есть
It's a
определенные
shame
проблемы с
because
диагностикой
there are problems
заболеваний
with
Альцгеймера и с
diagnostics of
медикаментозным
Alzheimer's and
лечением.
with drug
Потому что у
therapy.
меня такое сложилось ощущение, что
I have a
как-то
feeling
в
that
других странах с этим
in
проще
other countries
намного,
it's
что
simpler
посетители больше
somehow,
открыты
that the visitors are more open to communication,
другой среде,
to a different environment which is less familiar, where they feel more comfortable. It's not just about museums in Russia versus US, it's about the health sector, which unfortunately is in Russia lacking in many regards, but I hope that this could be doable here somewhere at some point in time.
I hope so too. So the comment was that because of diagnostics in Russia and the nature of the health sector, that a program like this might not be possible, that there might not be the comfort level in having people go to the museum. I'm just trying to paraphrase your question in English as well. I agree with you. I hope it is possible one day. And I would also just reiterate that the way our program started was by sending our educators to the assisted living facilities and to the nursing facilities. And over time, over a period of about 3 years or more than 3 years, building up trust between those groups in those assisted living facilities and their understanding of the museum, which was really translated through that particular educator. And I think our program was only possible because that trust had been developed by sending our educators off-site to those spaces that were thought of as safe spaces for that population, whereas the museum, I think, was not yet thought as a safer space. So if that's hopefully that story or that history can be helpful.
Спасибо. Thank you, Lara.